We be on the verge of another pandemic, and one that could be even worse than the one caused by coronavirus. This time it could actually be bird flu. Let's hope not. The CDC is now calling for more testing for bird flu at America's farms, sounding alarms after several farm workers contracted the disease from animals. Since 2003, there have been 888 confirmed human cases worldwide. That's according to the CDC. But here's the scary part. Half of those patients died from the disease.
50% kill rate. 50%. That, I mean, if you believe these facts, believe these statistics, again, it's one in two of us ain't gonna be here if this shit mutates. Compared to 0.6, if you believe that statistic, which I don't. We'll just leave it at that. That's extremely exaggerated in my redneck opinion. 0.6. That's way too high. What reality is.
Compare that to COVID, in which just 0.6% of people who tested positive actually died. The fear now is that the bird flu is changing, adapting, and could spread to not just birds, but also cattle and pigs, and then eventually spread from human to human. Former CDC Director Robert Redfield, who helped oversee our country's response to COVID, says it is definitely time to take this more seriously. And Dr. Redfield joins me live now. It's always nice to see you, Doctor. I remember you told Chris not long ago that the bird flu could make COVID look like a little pandemic, which was quite alarming. I mean, is that really the case?
Well, this dude here is a CDC director during all this madness, right? So whether or not you want to believe anybody in government, right, which I do not, but at some point, I mean, you have to listen.
Yes, Brian, I really do think it's very likely that we will at some time, it's not a question of if, it's more of a question of when, we will have a bird flu pandemic. And as you mentioned, unfortunately, bird flu has, when it does enter humans, has a significant mortality, probably somewhere between 25 and 50% mortality. So it's going to be quite complicated. Since 2019, we've had a progressive increase in bird flu in chickens and ducks and turkeys in our country. And since then, you've seen it now go into a number of mammals. It's now in over 25 different mammals. I think now with the llamas recently, it's now in 27 mammals in the United States.
It's just a matter of time. It's a matter of time before it starts transmitting from human to human.
Why is that important is we know exactly what has to happen for bird flu to be infectious for humans and go human to human. Scientists in 2012 actually did experiments in the lab using gain-of-function research, which I'm not in favor of, but the scientists did it, and they figured the 5 amino acids that have to change in a key receptor in order for bird flu to gain a propensity to bind to the human receptor and then be able to go human to human.
What they did gain-of-function research with ferrets. Not to get too far into the science, but it's easily done in the lab. So obviously, this virus exists in labs around the world because of gain-of-function research. We don't have to sit there and wait until it naturally occurs in nature. They've already done it. It already exists.
Is it like COVID, where if you cough, someone else can get it? Is that how it spreads, or does it spread a different way?
No, it's likely to spread through aerosol and droplets is how it's going to eventually spread. And once the virus gains the ability to attach to the human receptor and then go human to human, that's when you're going to have the pandemic. And as I said, I think it's just a matter of time. Normally, the 5 amino acid changes is a huge species barrier. So who knows how long that will take. But as it goes into more and more different mammals, it's changing its use of receptors. It's changing. It's learning how to use different receptors for dolphins and seals. And it's learning how to use receptors in bears and polar bears and foxes and raccoons and cats. So it's going through a lot of changes, and as it picks up some of these new receptors, it can get closer and closer to humans. Recently in cattle, where it was recently described and now is in a significant number of cattle in the United States, I'm concerned about that because cattle live close to pigs, and a lot of times in flu, there's been a relationship of flu going from pigs to humans as it's trying to evolve and gaining the receptors it needs to go human. I'm less concerned, though, that this will happen through spillover and evolution in animals. I'm much more concerned that this will happen in the laboratory through gain-of-function research.
Okay.
I can create this virus literally in weeks to months.
You can create it in weeks to months. So how many governments around the world, have it in their stockpile? How many people have mass produced it in a stockpile to be used as a bioweapon? Who the hell knows? But this guy almost gives some credibility when he says that, hey, I'm not worried about it mutating in the wild. I'm worried about a lab leak. Now that gives him credibility with me.
By using gain-of-function research, I know exactly what amino acids I have to change, because in 2012, against my recommendation, the scientists that did these experiments actually published them. So the recipe for how to make bird flu highly infectious for humans is already out there. All you have to do is look it up.
That's creepy to think about. It's creepy to think about, Dr. Redfield, and we know what can go wrong with the possibility of how COVID started in the lab and, the fact that these diseases can be weaponized.
Just a quick interview with a key player. And listening to him, he seems credible. If he'd have come on there and sugarcoated a bunch of stuff or skewed a bunch of stuff one way, what have you, he's just another dancing chicken. They turned up the heat on. So just doing a little bit more looking at this guy early on in 2021. Yeah, 2021, about a year later, he's already formulated his opinion about the lab leak. That's obviously where the shit come from. I have no idea why anybody else is still debating this crap today. But it ratchets up his credibility with me because early on he was going against the grain, against the narrative, talking about this was a lab leak. Of course it was a lab leak. The odds of this thing starting in a city with a biolab that researches it, come on, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that shit came from that lab in Wuhan. And maybe not through criminality or negligence, just, these things happen, right? It just passes from the research to the researcher.
Former director of the CDC is speaking out on when and where he thinks the coronavirus pandemic originated. Here is Dr. Robert Redfield when he sat down with Sanjay Gupta.
If I was to guess, this virus started transmitting somewhere in September, October in Wuhan.
September, October.
That's my own view. It's an only opinion. I'm allowed to have opinions now. I am of the point of view that I still think the most likely etiology of this pathogen in Wuhan was from a laboratory, escaped. Other people don't believe that. That's fine. Science will eventually figure it out. It's not unusual for respiratory pathogens that are being worked on in a laboratory to infect a laboratory worker.
It is also not unusual for that type of research to be occurring in Wuhan. The city is a widely known center for viral studies in China, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which has experimented extensively with bat coronaviruses.
It is a remarkable conversation I feel like we're having here because you are the former CDC director and you were the director at the time this was all happening.
For the first time, the former CDC director is stating publicly that he believes this pandemic started months earlier than we knew, and that it originated not at a wet market, but inside a lab in China.
These are two significant things to say, Dr. Redfield.
And that's not implying any intentionality. It's my opinion. right? But I am a virologist. I have spent my life in virology. I do not believe this somehow came from a bat to a human, and at that moment in time, the virus that came to the human became one of the most infectious viruses that we know in humanity for human-to-human transmission. Normally when a pathogen goes from a zoonotic to human, it takes a while for it to figure out how to become more and more efficient in human-to-human transmission. I just don't think this makes biological sense.
So in the lab, do you think that that process of becoming more efficient was happening? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, let's just say I have coronavirus that I'm working on. Most of us in the lab, we're trying to grow a virus. We try to help make it grow better and better and better and better and better and better so we can do experiments and figure out about it. That's the way I put it together.
Okay, so a couple points, right? Lag time. Now, all this shit started coming out back, January 2020, right? But that's not when it started. That's when it started for the world, but that's not when the bullshit started. You have to back up the timeline months before. So let's all, based on history, based on what happened in 2019 to 2020, let's all apply that same logic and timeline to what's going on and just ask the question, okay, this H5N1 is hitting the news, it's making the rounds. Okay, is this the infancy, as I used in the other video, and we all can safely assume that we're months behind the curve. If this is something real happening and it's not just bullshit to skew the elections coming up in the US. I mean, everybody believes something different about this, right? Look at the comments. Look at the comments on this video. Look at the comments on those videos. People are all over the scale to, hey, it's all bullshit, or B, this is real. It's to, doing more mail-in ballots. Everybody has a different opinion. Nobody's on the same sheet of music, but I think the one thing that we can be on the same sheet of music is that if there's anything real, the news, the discovery, the research, the testing, it's always behind the curve. The question is, how many months is it behind the curve? So if this is coming out saying, okay, this dude just died in Mexico of H5N2, now you've got, this many cattle herds in the US that are affected, that are infected. Well, really the numbers are probably triple that or quadruple that, because we're always behind. The viruses don't wait for anybody, right? So if we've got confirmed tests that are saying 12 herds, whatever the numbers are now, I just assume that it's at least quadruple. You know what I mean? So what is really going on at this point in time? What is this? June 18th of 2024, that history, by the end of this year is going to look back and say, oh, this shit was going on in January and February. It had already jumped or went airborne, or it was airborne among pigs. Who the hell knows? But all I'm saying is what's going on right now and what's put out there is already behind the curve. It's not up to date data. That's how these things work, right? No matter what the grand scheme is, the grand plan. But if the science is correct, and if those stats are correct, that there's a 50% kill rate, everything else doesn't matter. Is it a lab leak? Is it a conspiracy to skew the elections and keep people from voting and the mail-in? Who knows? It still doesn't change the 50% kill rate. Why do I keep talking about this? Again, it interests me. But number two, my biggest fear, and probably your fear as well, if you have family here, kids here, my biggest fear is the travel. Okay, I don't care about any of the other bullshit about the elections, what, they use this for their agenda. How does it affect me? Whiff 'em, right? Used to teach a class. You got to give the students a whiff 'em. What's in it for me? Yeah, whiff 'em. Why does this concern me? And my main concern is travel restrictions. Is this going to result in any travel restrictions where I go back to being a prisoner? There you go. That's my main concern. Because if it does jump and there's a 50% kill rate, it's going to be every man for himself. Okay? But say it doesn't manifest to a 50% kill rate and it's just bullshit, and they saber rattle this to where they try to pull some other lockdown. That's why I'm concerned. That's why I'm watching it. Because then I'm not free to move around the globe anymore. You're not free to come visit your kids, you know, if they're here. And again, this country was the most militant, archaic, brutal lockdown around the whole world. So what do you think is going to happen again? It's going to go back to the same damn thing if they decide to pull that trigger. That's why I continually keep an eye on it. And now we're just getting more and more news coverage. And so I'll just keep reporting. Keep reporting my suspicions. And right now, I don't know how it's going to go either way. I don't know how it's going to go. Can't predict the future.